My parents believed a girl's lie and hurt my brother. I got away from a bad home and fought to take care of my brother and live with him. I, a 14-year-old, have long harbored the desire to share this complex story. Please bear with me. It's quite a lengthy tale. I realize it may seem unbelievable, but I assure you it's my truth. This story has deeply affected my family, and discussing it openly is forbidden by my parents, who prefer to suppress their past actions. For safety, I'm using my friend's brother's Reddit account to share this. Both of my parents were previously married and lost their spouses. My father separated from my elder sister Lucy's mother, who is now 25. My mother's former husband tragically died in a car accident, leaving her to raise my 23-year-old brother on her own. Each parent had sole custody of their children when they first met on a beach, exchanged numbers, and started dating. They married 2 years later. Let's delve into the narrative that unfolded when I was just 8 years old, with my brothers at 17 and 19. My brother Kirby was a junior in high school, and my sister Lucy worked at a nearby grocery store. Since my parents and Lucy were often busy with work, Kirby was my primary caregiver. Although it might sound odd, the moments spent with Kirby were the highlights of my childhood. Unlike many older siblings who might not gel well with the younger ones, Kirby and I had a special bond. I adored him wholeheartedly, and his actions always showed that the feeling was mutual. He was more than just a brother. He was my protector, playmate, tutor, and sometimes he even took the fall for my mischiefs. One afternoon after school, I waited for Kirby to pick me up, as he usually did, since our schools were close by. However, this day was different. He never showed up. I waited until 4 p.m. only for Lucy to come get me instead. Curious and concerned, I asked her about Kirby, but she avoided the topic. When we arrived home, I was met with the shocking sounds of chaos, objects breaking, and my parents' furious shouts. As we stepped inside, the scene was heartbreaking. Kirby lay on the floor while my father lashed out violently, hurling dishes and kicks at him as my mother hurled venomous words his way. I was so terrified that I clung to my sister, refusing to leave her side. She hurried me upstairs and sternly told me not to leave the room until she came back for me. I sat there listening to the chaos below and crying. I had never witnessed such violence in my family before, and it left me with a deep-seated fear of them that lingers to this day. Suddenly, the wail of sirens pierced the air. Curious and scared, I peeked out the window and saw 2 police cars with officers bustling in and out of our house. Moments later, the clamor increased, and I heard an officer loudly declaring an arrest. To my shock, I saw my parents being led into a police van. They were shouting and hurling vile insults at Kirby, calling him a disgusting worm who deserved to die. My mother, in her fury, echoed the sentiment. At precisely 2:04 p.m., their tirade against Kirby reached its peak. By 2:10 p.m., they were secured in the police vehicle, and I ventured downstairs. The scene was heartbreaking. Lucy was sobbing on the floor, cradled by Kirby, who was covered in blood and bruises. The events that followed seemed like a blur. I vaguely remember riding in an ambulance to the hospital, feeling as though I was trapped in a surreal dream, while Lucy insisted it was a nightmare, the worst day of her life. 3 days later, with our parents still detained on charges of assault and attempted murder, Lucy took leave from work to look after me. Eventually, I gathered the courage to ask her what exactly had happened. Lucy, treating me more like an adult than ever before, shared the harsh truth. Kirby had been falsely accused of rape by a girl at his high school. She had approached the principal, visibly distressed and alleging Kirby had attacked her. The accusation led to our parents and the girl's parents being summoned by the school, with police involvement quickly following. Despite Kirby's protests of innocence, our parents refused to believe him, siding instead with the accuser. The police decided to conduct a full investigation, allowing Kirby and the girl to return home in the interim. That's when the confrontation occurred. Now, Kirby lies in the hospital, his condition so grave that he faces the possibility of enduring severe physical complications from the ordeal. The day after the incident, the police called my sister to the station, and I had to go with her. What they told us there was deeply disturbing. The girl who had filed the report was Karen. Karen, if you're reading this, know that you are the most reprehensible person I have ever encountered. I hope you come to understand the immense harm you've inflicted. Karen had fabricated the report out of spite because she and Kirby had always had a contentious relationship at school. Following another spat, she harmed herself and initially planned to accuse Kirby of assault. However, she escalated her accusations to rape, aiming to get Kirby expelled. Unfortunately for her, she boasted about her plan on a video call with her friends, who laughed along. Unexpectedly for Karen, her plan backfired as everyone except her best friend, who had her own painful history of being disbelieved about sexual abuse, turned against her. One of Karen's erstwhile friends couldn't stand by. She went to the police, disclosed the entire plot, and even managed to record some of their conversation. When the police confronted Karen, the fear of arrest made her confess the truth. My sister was furious. She was so angered that she wanted to take matters into her own hands against Karen, but the police intervened, explaining that Karen's parents would be fined for the false accusation and defamation. Although my sister thought this punishment was inadequate, she reluctantly accepted it. Upon our return home, our parents were there. As soon as my sister saw them, she unleashed everything that had transpired at the police station. They listened in stunned silence, their shock growing with each detail relayed. By the time she finished, my mother was crying, and I stood there paralyzed by the unfolding drama. Then my father asked the worst possible question, "Are you sure about this?" His words felt like the deepest betrayal. Lucy delivered a scathing rebuke, criticizing them for their blind acceptance of the accusations without any real evidence, while my father weakly attempted to justify his trust in Karen's initial story. However, my sister refuted that notion, stating that without concrete evidence, mere words held no weight. I understand that many victims of rape are dismissed as liars when their claims lack proof, but this situation is distinct. Karen deliberately deceived everyone for trivial reasons. I hope this is clear. Afterward, my father seemed defeated, and the house fell into a prolonged silence. Kirby's absence was deeply felt. He was the heart and spirit of our home. Always kind and amiable, he brought joy to everyone around him. It baffles me how my parents were so quickly swayed by Karen's lies. I harbor deep resentment towards them for this, and I doubt I can ever forgive their gullibility. When Kirby finally regained consciousness, he was in dire health. To paint a clearer picture, his jaw was broken, he had lost 60% of his vision in one eye, both his arm and wrist were fractured, his ribs were severely damaged, and he narrowly escaped a lung puncture. His leg injuries were so severe that he would need assistance to walk normally again. Moreover, he was now grappling with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. Kirby was fundamentally changed. He remained in constant pain and depended heavily on prescribed medications. He didn't speak for weeks, and even after the device stabilizing his jaw was removed, he barely communicated, only replying when directly questioned. He never expressed hunger and often broke down crying unexpectedly. I believe his silence stemmed from the trauma. I longed to embrace him, but his injuries made it too risky. Several times, our parents attempted to visit Kirby. My mother pleaded, and my father tried to coax us into reconciliation, but my sister stood firm, aware that Kirby had no desire to see them. Despite this, she explained their position to them, but it wasn't enough to deter them. One day, seizing an opportunity when my mother was at work, they thought to secretly visit Kirby. Their rationale probably went something like, let's visit our son, offer apologies, he forgives us, and then everything will go back to normal. We'll be a happy family once again. What a colossal mistake. As soon as my parents entered Kirby's hospital room, he let out the most piercing scream I had ever heard. Almost immediately, doctors and nurses rushed in to try to soothe him. Between shouts of, "Get them out, they're murderers, they've come to kill me," Kirby's fear was palpable, and then, overwhelmed by stress, he fainted. Following this incident, the hospital officially banned my parents from visiting. Only my sister and I were permitted to see Kirby. That night, my mother wept incessantly while my father indignantly claimed that Kirby was being overly dramatic. After many months of both physical and mental recovery, Kirby was finally released from the hospital. Despite everything, my parents had the audacity to invite him back home. Kirby's response was resolute. "I will not return to this house. Even if it were the last place on earth, I consider myself motherless. I hope you both suffer for what you've done to me." He chose instead to move in with his paternal grandparents, who were previously unaware of the full extent of the situation. His grandparents took immediate steps to protect him from our parents. Kirby warmly invited my sister and me to visit him anytime, and we often did. In fact, I spent more time with him than I did at home. The final break came during a family gathering when it was revealed that my father had lied to everyone. He claimed that Kirby had dropped out of school to live in a drug-ridden area and had run away from home, taking with him his belongings and the money saved for my college education. But the truth was, that money wasn't even earned by my parents. Kirby and Lucy had painstakingly saved it for my tuition. Kirby had worked multiple odd jobs, committed to the belief that I deserved a better future. My sister and I were incensed. We disclosed the entire truth to our relatives, who were shocked and dismayed by our parents' actions. The only exceptions were my paternal grandparents, who stubbornly supported my parents, rationalizing their actions by saying to err is human and claiming they were just embarrassed by their deeds. However, no one else bought into this excuse. The rest of the family distanced themselves from my parents and went on to offer their apologies to Kirby. Interestingly, the very next day, Kirby called me, clearly bewildered by how quickly everything had unfolded. Kirby was puzzled by the sudden influx of apologies from people he hadn't spoken to in months. A year after the incident, Karen's parents came to our house. They asked if Kirby was home, and when we told them he wasn't, they apologized for their daughter's actions and left. Later, I discovered that their visit was more than just an apology. They had offered Kirby compensation, giving him all the funds they had set aside for Karen's college education and a car. While Kirby appreciated the gesture, he made it clear that he hadn't forgiven Karen and probably never would. He told them if Karen ever confronted him, he wouldn't hold back from telling her some harsh truths. Her parents accepted his stance and left. Currently, my brother is doing much better. Though he hasn't fully recovered, he still suffers from nightmares about the incident, which often lead to anxiety attacks. When these happen, someone needs to be there to comfort him. Wanting to support him more, I decided to move in with Kirby. I discussed the idea with him, and although he was initially hesitant, he eventually agreed and informed his grandparents, who gave their consent. Lucy also thought it was a great idea. However, the conversation with my parents went very differently. Upon hearing my decision, my mother burst into tears and my father became hysterical, lamenting that everyone had already abandoned them and now his youngest son was doing the same. I responded harshly, telling him that I had effectively abandoned him that dreadful day and he would never win me back. My father, a man in his 50s who always preached that crying was for the weak, broke down sobbing. He said he had already lost so much and couldn't bear to lose me as well. Overwhelmed, I left and went to a friend's house to clear my head. There, my friend chastised me for my decision to leave my parents. However, his older brother, Steve, who owns this Reddit account, intervened. He told his brother to be quiet, asserting that he didn't understand the full situation. Steve, seeing my turmoil, introduced me to Reddit and suggested I seek broader perspectives by posting my story here. So, folks, what should I do? Update 1. A lot has unfolded since I last posted here. While I originally came with a question, I first want to express my gratitude for everyone's supportive responses and a special thanks to Steve, the owner of this account, for his help. Here's what happened. I made a break from home after my parents prohibited me from leaving. They usually went shopping without me, treating me like a child they assumed would only beg for purchases. This time, unexpectedly, they insisted I join them, which initially disrupted my plans. I hastily packed essentials and some snacks into a backpack. At the market, I used their distraction with rising food prices as my chance. My dad told me to go to the restroom and come right back. Plot twist, I didn't return. Instead, I sprinted out of the market, caught the first bus towards Kirby's grandparents' place, and never looked back. Upon arriving, Kirby's grandmother welcomed me warmly, telling me to relax until Kirby and his grandfather got back. When I explained everything to them, including my Reddit post, Kirby didn't react as I expected. He scolded me, calling my flight reckless and dangerous, saying anything could have happened. Strangely, I found comfort in his concern. Unlike our parents, Kirby's worry stemmed from genuine care. There were times I had been gone for days, and our parents hadn't even noticed, except to get angry once they realized. Accepting his admonishment, I asked if I could stay. Kirby, knowing my determination, half-jokingly said, "You'd come back here even if I sent you home, so you might as well stay." His acceptance meant the world to me, and I hugged him, relieved. His grandparents also supported his decision. However, my relief was short-lived. Kirby insisted that I needed to contact our parents because they were still legally responsible for me. I resisted, fearing they would try to take me back, but Kirby was adamant. And Kirby warned, "If you don't tell them, they can claim I kidnapped you and am holding you hostage." Reluctantly, I called my mother. She didn't even pause to listen before she started yelling, demanding to know my whereabouts. When I revealed where I was, her tone became even harsher, her words echoing so loudly that everyone around could hear. I might have let her continue, but I hung up as I saw Kirby's discomfort. Since the incident, he'd become highly sensitive to any form of yelling. It reminded him too much of past traumas. He cursed our parents for the damage they had inflicted upon him. My anger flared when my mother threatened to retrieve me by force, but Kirby calmly countered, "They're aggressive but not foolish. They know I have a protective order against them. If they come close, We'll call the police. He was mistaken about their caution. Just an hour and a half later, they were pounding on the front door, their shouts filling the air, demanding entry and berating Kirby for generations to come. Kirby's grandparents warned them to leave, threatening to call the police. Their threats only fueled our parents' frenzy, and they continued to bang on the door. I wanted to confront them myself, but Kirby needed me. He was on the brink of going down to face them. Consumed by his deep-seated resentment, he once confessed he fantasized about harming them grievously. I understood his feelings, but I didn't think it wise for him to stoop to their level. Just then, they broke through the door and began rampaging through the house looking for me. I decided it was time to intervene. I asked Kirby to stay in his room while I handled the situation. As I descended, the chaos escalated. My mother's screams were the loudest I'd ever heard, and my father had gone eerily silent. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, the scene was grim. My father was on the floor, trembling as my mother stood over him, yelling desperately. Kirby's grandfather held a taser in his hand, the reason for my father's condition becoming apparent. When my mother saw me, she shifted gears, playing the victim. "Look what they did to your father. Call the police. They should be arrested." I responded firmly. "If I call the police, it will be you and Dad who get arrested for breaching the protective order." She continued to scream, ignoring my words and insisting that we call an ambulance for my father. We suggested that once he recovered, they should leave and never return. When my father finally regained his composure, he was unusually subdued, visibly defeated. Shortly after, Kirby came downstairs. My mother launched into a tirade against him, blaming him for alienating the rest of the family and accusing him of turning her children against her. She played the victim, claiming she was a devout churchgoer who did not deserve this ordeal. Her attempts to garner sympathy were futile. No one was moved by her plea, especially not Kirby, who remained silent through most of her rant. However, she pushed too far when she demanded that Kirby apologize to them for ruining their lives and tell the family he had forgiven them. That was Kirby's breaking point. Overcome with anger, he struck her, causing her to fall to the ground. My mother resumed her screaming, but Kirby, fueled by years of pent-up frustration, warned her harshly against continuing. He unleashed his feelings, condemning their actions and declaring they deserved no one's sympathy. He even said that he would desecrate their graves. In a rage, my mother tried to strike Kirby, but I intervened, pushing her against the wall. She turned her anger towards me, condemning me to hell and hurling homophobic slurs, calling me a dirty lesbian. For context, I am bisexual, a fact I once shared with my parents. Surprisingly, my father was accepting, but my mother reacted with fury, even trying to set me up with her church friends' daughters, making everyone uncomfortable. Interestingly, when I confided in Kirby, his only comment was, "So you gonna give me a nephew?" "Let's keep our cool," my brother asserted. Then he demanded that our parents leave and compensate for the damage they had caused to the house, or we would press charges. My mother scoffed, saying I lacked the courage to report my own mother. I retorted, "What I have in abundance is courage, and I would find satisfaction in seeing you arrested once more." She tried to dismiss our claims, arguing we had no proof, but Kirby quickly countered, pointing out that we had fingerprints, video evidence, and security camera footage. It took a while, but she finally conceded defeat, and they left. However, Kirby couldn't resist one final parting shot. As she got into the car, he called out, "Hey, I wish you could have died in my father's place." She responded with a middle finger and a scream as she got into the car, which made Kirby burst out laughing. A triumphant laugh, as if he had just won a marathon session of his favorite video game. Shortly after, our sister called. Our mother had told her that Kirby had assaulted her and that she needed to bring me home to fix me. However, our sister was on our side. She expressed her pride in me for standing up to our parents and half-jokingly suggested that Kirby should have used the cane on them instead. Now, I'm living with Kirby just as I've always wanted, and it's been incredible. He's even begun the process to gain custody of me and has warned our parents to comply. My mother remains defiant, absurdly claiming she cannot leave me with an abuser. She even suggested that my being bisexual was because Kirby had molested me, which is ludicrous. I guess now it's just a matter of waiting for her to give in. For now, everything seems to be moving according to plan. I had a deep conversation with Kirby before he fell asleep last night. He pondered what life might have been like if his father were still alive. I suggested that perhaps his life might have been somewhat better, but he mused, maybe, maybe not. Without his death, I might have avoided some pain, but then I wouldn't have my two angels in my life. He then kissed my forehead, sealing our conversation with a moment of affection. I must confess, that moment with Kirby was truly heartwarming. I hugged him tightly. I love him deeply, and I know we will always stand up for each other. Thanks to everyone who has supported us through this ordeal. I wish no one ever has to endure what we have gone through. For those who doubt the authenticity of our story, I wish it were indeed just a story. I always hoped we'd be a loving family that stood by each other no matter what. But it seems that kind of unity is only possible in my dream. Goodbye for now. Perhaps I'll return with an update on how everything turns out. Until then, update 2. Hello again, everyone. I appreciate all the support. Trust me, I am doing okay, and Kirby is managing better than before, but just okay isn't enough for him. He's determined to gain custody of me and is relentlessly challenging our parents. This isn't just an update to say we're fine, though. Let me dive into the latest developments. We were enjoying a quiet afternoon when there was a knock at the recently repaired door. A friend of Kirby's grandfather had fixed it. I answered it, surprised to find my father there. I immediately tried to send him away, but he insisted he just wanted to talk and meant no trouble. I told him to leave and that any discussion we needed to have could happen in court. Yet, he persisted, and Kirby's grandparents were ready to call the police. To our shock, Kirby decided to let him in, and we were hesitant, but Kirby explained that my father was stubborn and wouldn't leave easily, so it might be better to just deal with him and get it over with. We let him in, but were on high alert for any signs of aggression. We all stayed in the kitchen where Kirby's grandmother began recording the conversation, hoping to gather evidence of my father breaching the restraining order. The conversation went something like this. Kirby said with a cold tone, "Very brave of you to come back here after everything you've done." "I'm sorry, I swear. I'll pay for all the damage," my father responded earnestly. Kirby scoffed. "Pay? You think you can fix everything with money, right? But we're not talking about material things that can be replaced. What you did has left scars that money can't heal, father." "I know. I apologize. I would give anything to go back in time and do everything differently." Kirby, "But you can't. The damage is done. You've devastated me." Kirby, "You destroyed your own family." Father, "There was an accident. If you had told us from the start, things might have been different." Kirby, "More lies. You didn't want to listen. Do you even grasp what you did to me? You made me feel like I was unworthy of living. You've made me want to die. Can you understand how that feels? No, because you are the aggressor, and the aggressor can never comprehend the victim's terror." At that point, Kirby began to cry. It wasn't just sadness. It was a cry loaded with years of pent-up wrath and bitterness. My father kept apologizing, fruitlessly trying to ease his own guilt rather than expressing true remorse. Finally, Kirby, on the verge of another anxiety attack, issued his ultimatum. "Kirby, you want forgiveness? Here's what's going to happen. You will grant me custody of my brother, you'll pay child support, and you'll stay away from me, him, and anyone else in our lives. Or else, I will make sure your days become unbearable." My father agreed immediately. It's hard to feel pity for him when I've never seen him so utterly defeated. Perhaps the magnitude of his actions finally dawned on him, but I harbor no sympathy. He deserves to feel the full weight of the pain he inflicted upon our family. After our conversation, he left, murmuring that he would try to convince my mother to relinquish custody. He asked for my forgiveness too, but I simply ignored him. Once he left, Kirby's facade of strength crumbled. He burst into tears and collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion, hyperventilating and covered in a cold sweat. We helped him to his room to lie down, offering him anxiety medication, but it seemed to bring little relief. I reached out to my sister and detailed everything that had happened. She arrived immediately, and we all stayed in Kirby's room trying to soothe him. Throughout the ordeal, my sister kept reassuring him that he was one of the bravest people she knew. Despite his overwhelming anxiety, he had the courage to confront our father, his abuser, and the man he referred to as his murderer. After several hours, Kirby's nerves settled and he eventually fell asleep. Lucy and I decided to stay in his room overnight just in case he experienced any nightmares. However, the drama didn't end there. Hours later, my mother called, furiously asking what that demon Kirby had done to her husband. She accused Kirby of manipulating her sweet husband, claiming that he now wanted to give everything to Kirby. Lucy sharply told her to back off, pointing out that at least someone had come to their senses. We both hoped that eventually my mother would come to her senses and do the right thing. I'm grateful for everyone's support, especially Steve, the owner of this account, who has been a steadfast ally since I began sharing my story. I'll continue to update if there are any new developments. Until then, take care. For those wondering why I use pseudonyms, it's to protect my brother's privacy. I don't want their lives further disrupted. Update 3. Hello, everyone. It's been some time since my last update, and you all deserve to hear the latest. I'm thrilled to report that it's finally over. I'm free from that toxic environment. In my previous update, I mentioned that my mother was unwilling to relinquish custody. Despite my father's threats, she was adamant about not abandoning me and was determined to regain my trust. Since she wouldn't relent, we resorted to a different strategy. We shared the full story with our extended family, explaining how Kirby was seeking custody. The family understood the gravity of the situation and confronted my mother directly, suggesting that transferring custody was the least she and my father could do to atone for their past actions. Yet my mother resisted, cutting off contact with all our relatives, accusing Kirby of having bewitched them with his narrative. Typical indeed. A week after I moved in with Kirby, my mother called with an ultimatum. "You have 2 choices," she stated. "You can come home without a fuss and we'll forget all this ever happened, or you can stay there and suffer the consequences." I flatly refused to give in to her intimidation. I told her that even if the worst happened, I would never return to that house. She hung up on me. Concerned that she might attempt something drastic against Kirby, I immediately called to inform him. He reassured me not to worry and promised to alert me if anything suspicious occurred. Then, it happened. The police showed up, but not at our door. They knocked on our neighbors, an elderly lady who is quite kind. The police had been called over an alleged child abuse claim at our address. However, realizing their mistake, they quickly corrected course. It didn't take long to piece together what had happened. My mother had called the police, but in her rush, she got our address wrong, directing them to the wrong house. Hours later, my mother called again, suggesting she might withdraw her complaint if I returned home quietly. My response was clear. I told her to go to hell and hung up. Kirby apologized to our neighbor for the mix-up. That's when he decided it was time to change our strategy. Since my mother wanted to play dirty, we would play dirtier. We decided to involve the one person my mother detests more than anyone, our maternal grandmother. Unfortunately, acquiring her contact was challenging because, regrettably, our grandmother has a strained relationship with me and my sister purely because we are our father's children. She's the type of grandmother who has a clear favorite, which, in our family, is Kirby. This gave us a somewhat unfair advantage. After a diligent search, we finally found her contact information. Kirby called her and explained everything from the assault to our current predicament. When he asked if she could intervene, her response was immediate. She promised to be here as quickly as she could. And true to her word, she arrived in our city just an hour and 30 minutes later, although all Kirby had initially hoped for was that she might call our mother to influence her. Grandma agreed to the plan and immediately paid a surprise visit to my parents' place, which my mother absolutely detests. She even called me and Lucy to ask if my brother was behind this, but we played it cool. It was somewhat satisfying to hear her frustration. Our grandma was intentionally driving our parents up the wall, and they couldn't retaliate because, as I've come to understand, my mother is driven by greed, and my grandmother owns a large piece of property that could sustain someone for a very long time. Yes, it's true. My parents are not only misguided and erratic, but also profoundly greedy. It seems my brother must have ended up in the wrong family because the whole situation is just mind-boggling. After enduring 2 weeks of misery, my mother finally broke down and asked our grandmother when she planned to leave. Grandma stated she would only leave if my mother agreed to relinquish custody of me, which my mother initially refused. Desperate for our grandmother to leave, my mother played her final card: either relinquish custody of me or be completely cut out of the will, losing any claim to both son and money. Guess which option prevailed? So, we proceeded to court, and if looks could kill, my parents would have been 6 feet under. The judge was visibly disturbed as he reviewed the past events, puzzled by how my parents had evaded justice for so long. In today's society, it often feels like money weighs more than one's misdeeds. My father even covered his face in shame, but my mother sat there, unaffected, convinced she had done nothing wrong. The most intense moment was when Kirby and my mother faced each other in court. The glares they exchanged were chilling. It's hard to believe these two once lived under the same roof. My mother might seem normal and friendly to outsiders, but she's cunning and manipulative. Cross her, and you're instantly seen as a threat and harshly dealt with. Kirby, on the other hand, is incredibly open-minded, almost to a fault. He's the type of person who could befriend anyone. If you ever see a young man with a cane smiling and waving. That's probably him. So, how do these two such contradictory personalities come from the same family? As for the legal proceedings, they were both complicated and swift. In the end, my parents were unwilling to truly fight for Casso. Our lawyer managed to secure an agreement where I would live with my brother, and my parents would be obligated to pay a substantial amount in child support. My mother protested, questioning why they should pay since I was now my brother's responsibility, but both my father and grandmother promptly told her to accept the deal quietly. After a lengthy and exhausting process, we finally got what we wanted. Now I can live with Kirby without our parents having any control over me. I deleted my parents' contact information from my phone just 30 minutes after the court's decision. I no longer need it. They have become a part of my past that I wish to leave behind. But there's a twist. Before she left, Granny revealed something shocking. My mother had never been included in the will. Shortly after she married my father, Granny had removed her, which, in hindsight, is somewhat humorous. Essentially, she traded her potential inheritance for something she'll never get. Only Kirby is mentioned in Granny's will, which seems fitting and, frankly, perfect to me. Kirby got everything he wanted and deserved. I'm not sure if this is what you'd call divine justice, but it certainly feels just, and we couldn't be more pleased with the outcome. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone on Reddit and the owner of this account for their support and guidance during this tumultuous period in my life. Now, we finally have a happy ending. On a personal note, I hope I won't need to return to this platform unless it's absolutely necessary. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more unbelievable real-life stories like mine.